Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Aleph, Daf 41 of Masechta Sukkah. We're going to start. We got a little bit of work to do on Daf Mem Amud Beis. We're going to continue with the machlokas that we started with yesterday between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan about money taking on the holiness of Shemitah. Okay, we're going to continue with that machlokas until we get to a new Mishnah, which discusses taking the lulav in the Beis Hamikdash and the Gzera and the Takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to take the lulav for all 7 days, Zeichel Hamikdash, and then we talk about a situation when the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos. So in a new Mishnah. So let's get started over here. And Daf Mem Amud Beis. Tanikavasa de Belazar v'Tanikavasa de Yochanan. When Daf Mem Amud Beis, we got a little bit of work to do over here. Maybe about 20 lines up from the bottom. The first one on the line is Tanya. Tanikavasa de Belazar v'Tanikavasa de Yochanan. So we have a brisa supporting Rabbi Elazar and a brisa supporting Rabbi Yochanan. Who could tell me what they say? Rabbi Elazar's opinion was that the only way for money to get the holiness of Shemitah is through a transaction, through selling. That if you have fruits of Shemitah, Peris Shvius, fruits of Shemitah that have the holiness of Shemitah, and you sell them, so then the money that you receive also has the holiness of Shemitah. Rabbi Yochanan says, in addition to a transaction, you could push it and just transfer the holiness of the fruits onto money. Just like you could do with, let's say, Peris Meiser Sheni, right? You have Meiser Sheni, and then you just transfer the value onto money. So you could do the same thing with fruits of Shemitah. Okay. So now the Gemara says, Tanikavasa de Rabbi Elazar v'Tanikavasa de Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa supporting each one of these Amoraim. Tanikavasa de Rabbi Elazar. We have a brisa that supports Rabbi Elazar. Let's see. Shvius Tofesis says Domel. Okay, that Shemitah, applies also to its value, to its money. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ki Yoveli Kodesh Tiyeh Lochin, that it's Yovel, and as we said yesterday, Yovel and Shemitah have the same halachis. So it's Yovel, and it will be Kodesh for you, it will be holy for you. Ma Kodesh Tofes is Domav, Ve'osur Av Shvius Tofes as Domeh Ve'osur. So just like Hekdish, its value goes on to money. Its holiness goes on to money. So also the same thing applies to Perish Shvius, right? So just like if I have an animal, right? I set aside an animal, a makdish, a korban, right? I say, look, Mr. Animal, you're going to be a korban. And then it turns out that it has a mum or something like that, and you can't use it as a korban. So you want to sell it. So you sell it, and now the money gets the holiness of the korban. So the same thing applies to Perish Shvius. That if you sell these Perish Shvius, so then the money takes on the holiness of Shvius. In fact, the Gemara, but 1 second, when it comes to that animal, when it comes to Hekdish, or I guess I don't know if you're being makdish as a korban. I guess so. Why not? Yeah. You still being makdish as a korban. I think that we learned somewhere that like you're dafka not supposed to be makdish an animal to the bedek habayis. Although if it has a mum, then maybe. I think we're saying that if you are makdish a korban, an animal like to be a korban, I think, and then you sell it, so then the money takes on the value of the korban. Now the thing is, when the money takes on the holiness of the animal, so then the animal is no longer holy. So if I have this animal that I set aside, I'm assuming to be a korban, and now it's holy, because you're makdish it. So it has holiness that you set it aside to be for a korban. But it has a blemish or something, so you can't use it. So you sell it. What happens in that case is that the money the animal becomes chulin. It's no longer holy. And the money now becomes holy, because you have to use it to, buy another korban or something holy. So in that case, so the animal is no longer holy, and the money is now holy. So if that's the case, we should say the same thing by the fruits of Shvius. That I have these fruits, they're holy, I sell them, I receive money for it, so it should be the same deal. The money gets the holiness of the Shvius, and the fruits are no longer holy. So the Gemara says, no, that's not how it works. Or I think it's still the Brisa. It's not how it works. It says, Ki yovel hi kodesh tiyeh lachem. Tiyeh meaning it remains holy. So actually when it comes to the Perish Shvius, when it comes to the fruits of Shemitah, so they're holy. And if you sell them, so then the money that you receive is also holy. But guess what? The fruits remain holy as well. So now you have double holy. The fruits are still holy, and the money that you received from them is also holy. Okay, tzad. So what does this look like? Lokach beperish shvius baser. So if you use the fruits of shvius, of Shemitah, to purchase meat, okay? Elu velu misabin misbayrim b'shvius. So basically both the fruits of Shemitah as well as the meat now have kedusha shvius. Lokach bebaser dogim. If then you took this meat that has the holiness of Shemitah and you use that to purchase fish, yotze baser. So now the meat no longer has the holiness of shvius. V'nichnesu dogim. But now the fish that you purchased with that meat becomes kedusha shvius, right? So again, so you started with fruits. You use the fruits to buy meat. Now both the fruit and the meat have kedusha shvius. Now if you use that meat, which is basically something that so it's not the fruit of shvius anymore, but it's something that took on the value of the fruits and now has its own holiness of shvius. And then you take that meat and you use that meat now to purchase fish. So then the kedusha shvius goes away from the meat, and now the fish has it. If you then use the fish to purchase wine, so now the fish no longer has kedusha shvius, the wine does. If you use the wine to buy oil, well now the wine no longer has kedusha shvius, but the oil does. So we see that each subsequent purchase takes on the holiness of shvius, but the original fruit remains holy with the holiness of shvius, right? So therefore, the fruit itself will always stay kedusha shvius. There's no getting rid of the holiness of shvius, of Shemitah, from the fruit. The fruit, its fruits of Shemitah, it's holy. It has kedusha shvius. When you then use that fruit to purchase something else, in our case meat, so now they both have kedusha shvius. And while the fruit always remains holy with the holiness of shvius, the thing that was purchased with the fruit, that can kind of jump from one thing to the next. And therefore, so when you use the fruits of shvius to buy meat, the meat becomes kedusha shvius as well. But then if you use the meat to buy fish, well then the kedusha shvius goes away from the meat and becomes transferred to the fish. If you use the fish to buy wine, it then goes to the wine, etc., etc. The last thing that you buy is always going to take on the kedusha shvius, but the fruits themselves remain holy. And says the Gemara, where am I? Miligtani lokach almaderech mekach in derech hilalo. And the reason why this is a support for Rebbe Elazar is because Rebbe Elazar says that the only way for money to take on the holiness of Shemitah is through a transaction. And we specifically see in this brisa that we're talking about transactions, right? Right? It says that you take the fruit and you buy meat. You take the meat and you buy fish, right? So we see that the only way for something else to take on the holiness of Shvius is to a transaction. Tana Kavasa to Rabbi Yochanan, and we have a brayso upon Rabbi Yochanan who says that in addition to a transaction, you can also, transfer the holiness of Shemitah onto money like you can any other hekdesh. Tana Kavasa to Rabbi Yochanan, Echad Shvius ve'echad Meiser Sheni. So whether we're talking about fruits of Shemitah, whether we're talking about produce of Meiser Sheni, Mischalin al Behemah Chayav Ha'ov, you can actually transfer the holiness onto animals, domesticated animals, undomesticated animals, birds. Ben Chayin, Ben Shchuten, Divrei Reb Meir, whether these, domesticated, undomesticated animals and birds, whether they're alive, whether they're gestorben. That's Reb Meir's opinion. The Chachamim say, Al Shchutim Mischalin, Al Chayin Ein Mischalin, whereas the Chachamim say, no, you could transfer the holiness of Shemitah and Meiser Sheni onto gestorben animals, onto dead animals. But if they're alive, no, stay away from that. Gezer Shem Yigdal Me'en Adarim, because we're concerned, well, what if you transfer the Kedusha onto these animals that are alive, and then they have children, and like they end up just kind of having the Kedusha of Shvius, and it can become Kedusha of Shvius, or Meiser Sheni, it could become problematic. So the Chachamim say, don't get started with the live ones. On my Ravit, okay, so 1 second. So what do we see? So we see that in this brayso, we're saying that Peir Shvius, you're allowed to transfer its holiness onto something else, onto animals. So we see that you are allowed to also transfer the Kedusha of Shvius onto other things like money. We're seeing animals over here. Amar Rave machlokas bizcharim. Says Rave that this machlokas between Reb Meir and the Chachamim about can you transfer the Kedusha of Shvius or Meiser Sheni onto animals. Do they have to, right? Reb Meir says they can even be alive. The Chachamim say they cannot be alive. So Rava says the machlokas is by male animals. Because the male animals, they don't give birth. Male animals don't give birth to future generations of animals. So therefore, Reb Meir has a havmina to say that you'd be allowed to use even live animals because they're not going to give birth to more animals. But if if we're talking about female animals, then everybody agrees. Even Reb Meir says, forget it. You can't transfer the Kedusha of Shvius or Meiser Sheni onto the female animals because, we have to be concerned about that they're going to have children, and then we can come into problems with the future generations still having the Kedusha. We don't want that. So everyone agrees that if they're female, you cannot transfer the Kedusha to live animals. However, if they're male, so Reb Meir says, we're not concerned, and you can transfer it onto live animals, but the Chacham say, no, we still have to be concerned. Omer Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi machlokas. Now the machlokas between Reb Elazar and Reb Yochanan about is the only way to transfer the Kedusha of Shvius by way of a transaction. What about by way of just being mechalel, transferring the Kedusha onto money, or as we saw, onto animals? So it says Rav Ashi, this machlokas between Reb Elazar and Reb Yochanan is befririshin. That is by the first fruit. What does that mean? The fruit of Shvius itself. But the second thing, such as in the brayso that we mentioned a few minutes ago, the meat, right? If you transfer, right? If you use Peir Shvius to buy meat, so now the meat also has Kedusha Shvius, so that's what's called the Pri-Sheni, sort of the second level. Divrei Akol, Bein Derech Mekach, Bein Derech Chilul. This Pri-Sheni, in our case the meat, you can transfer the Kedusha Shvius of the meat, right? Because if you use the fruits to buy meat, so the meat now also has the holiness of Shvius. So how can that be transferred to something else? So everyone agrees in that case, once you get up to the second level of holiness right? The second degree of holiness in the meat in our example. So that can be transferred to, let's say, the fish that we're talking about in two ways, right? Either by a purchase, that you could use the meat to purchase fish, as we mentioned in our brisa. But says Rav Ashi that this meat you would also be able to transfer to the fish just by transferring it, just by saying I'm transferring the holiness of this meat onto this fish. That would also work. So again, says Rav Ashi, when it comes to the fruit itself, so we have this machlokas. Rabbi Elazar says the only way for the kedusha shvius to be really extended to something else would be through a purchase, through a transaction, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says also it could be transferred just by being mechalal it. But says Rav Ashi, when it comes to the second degree of kedusha shvius, such as if you use the fruit of shvius to buy meat, this meat now also has kedusha shvius. That holiness from the meat could be transferred to, let's say, fish in our example, either, everyone agrees, says Rav Ashi, either by way of a purchase or by simply transferring the kedusha onto the meat, onto the fish. But then why does the brisa that we mentioned earlier keep on saying buying, right? Meaning our brisa that we mentioned, we said you take fruit and you buy meat, and now the meat becomes kedusha shvius. So over there we're saying specifically buying, okay, and that makes sense because, meaning according to Belazar, because it's the first level it's the first degree of kedusha shvius. It's the fruit itself. You have to buy the meat in order to transfer, in order for the meat to also have kedusha shvius. But then it continues to say, you take the meat and you buy fish. You take the fish and you buy oil. I thought at that point you could just be mechalal it. Why does it keep on saying buying? I thought from the second degree already you could just transfer the kedusha. So Tana Reisha Lokach, Tana Nami Seifa Lokach. So the Gemara says that's not really such a big deal, because really it's just because since the first part of the brisa talks about purchasing, because there you really have to purchase, at least according to Rabbi Elazar, because we're talking about the pre-rishon, the first degree of kedusha shvius, which is the fruit itself. So therefore even the subsequent levels, right, such as the meat, the fish, the oil, the wine, there also we're going to talk about purchases, even though really at that point you could just transfer it. Eis v'Ravina l'Ravashi. Ravina asks a kasha to Ravashi. Here's the question. Mishayesh lo sela shel shvius. Okay, you have of course a fellow, and the fellow has a sela, a certain amount of money, and that money is shmita money. Uvikesh likach bo choluk, and he wanted to use this sela to buy a shirt. Now a shirt, you have to be, you don't want to use shmita money to buy a shirt. So what can you do? Ketzad yaisa. So what does he do? So you go to a store owner who you're familiar with, who you have a good relationship with. Now, this is lav dafka. You don't dafka have to have a good relationship with him, but the point is, in order to do the following scheme, you're going to want to probably find somebody who's willing to scheme with you. Ve'omerlo, and you say to the store owner, Tenli bisela peiris. And he says, hey, store owner, here's this sela, and this sela is kedusha shvius. Do me a favor, let me give you this sela, and you'll give me the fruits of shvius. Okay. V'nosin lo. And then he gives so they do this transaction. This fellow gives to the store owner the shvius sela, the shmita money, and he gets in return these fruits. And now this money, as we had said a few minutes ago, right, that once it comes to the second degree, so then it gets transferred to the next thing, right? So basically, how did this money become holy with kedusha shvius? Well, because it was used in like a transaction, right? If you take fruits of shvius, as we said, and you sell it, so then the money that you receive for it also has kedusha shvius. But this money, when it gets transferred to the next thing, the money becomes chulin. So therefore, when this fellow goes to the store owner and he buys fruit with this money of shmita, so then the fruit now takes on the holiness of shmita, the fruit that he buys, but the money is now no longer shmita money. V'chozer v'omer, and now he says to the store owner, Hare peiris alalu nesunim lach b'matana. now now the purchaser says to the store owner, like, hey man, so now there's these fruits that I have now that have Kedusha Shvius, let me just give them back to you. V'hu omer lo, heilach sela zob matana. And the store owner says to the fellow, you can have back your money. And he can now buy whatever he wants. So what do we see? So what happens here? So basically, you had this money that had the holiness of Shvius, right? And he wanted to buy a shirt with them. So he can't use this money to buy a shirt. But what he does is he goes to the store owner and he buys fruits with this money. So now the fruit takes on the holiness of Shvius, and then the money is now chulin, because you basically transferred its kedusha onto the fruit. Now the fruit has kedusha Shvius, the money is chulin. Right now the store owner has the money, the fellow has the fruit, but then they swap. And he says to the store owner, let me just give you this fruit, and you give me the money. Now the store owner has the fruit that has the kedusha Shvius, and he's got to eat them with the holiness of Shvius. But the fellow now has the money, and it's chulin, and he can do whatever he wants with that money. And now, frekta gemara ve'ahacha, and in this case, the prisheniu that we're talking about, the second degree of kedusha Shvius, right? We're talking about money, right? It's money that he wants to use to buy like a shirt. So now, this is obviously talking about second degree of Kedusha Shvius, because first degree being the fruit itself. V'katoni derech mekach in derech chilulo. And specifically, this brisa is saying that if you have this money and you want to buy a shirt, how do you make it chulin? Davka, through a transaction. You go to a store owner, you buy fruit. It seems pretty clear that you have to make a transaction, because if you could just transfer it, he could have done that at home. Right? He could have just taken some fruit, transferred the holiness onto fruit at home. He wouldn't have to find a store owner and do this whole scheme. So from the fact that he has to scheme with a store owner and buy something in order to transfer the value onto the fruit, and then the money becomes chulin, clearly there's an opinion that says that even when it comes to second degree kedusha shvius, the only way to transfer the money would be the holiness would be through a transaction. So Elam Ravashi rather says Ravashi machlokas b'prisheni. The machlokas actually between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar is by the second degree of kedusha shvius. Aval b'firishon, when it comes to the first degree of kedusha shvius, tivakol derech mekachin derech chilul. But if we're talking about the first degree of kedusha shvius, i.e., the fruits themselves, even Rabbi Yochanan would admit that the only way for the holiness to go onto something else would be through a transaction, not through just being mechal, through transferring it. Okay. But one second. What about this brisa that was a support for Rabbi Yochanan that says that both by Shemitah and by Meiser Sheni you could transfer the holiness onto animals? Which implies that even the fruits of Shvius you could transfer onto animals. So it sounds like, right, that was the proof for Rabbi Yochanan, that Kilu, you can be mechal, even the pre-rishon, even the first degree of Kedusha Shvius. So my Shvius, the Mei Shvius. So we're not talking about the fruits themselves. We're talking about the money, the Mei Shvius, the money. So if you take the fruits and you buy and you sell them, and now the money has Kedusha Shvius, that you can transfer onto animals. But the Shemitah itself, you would not be able to transfer onto animals. You'd have to sell it. De'ilo teimach, in order for the money to get the Kedusha Shvius. De'ilo teimachi, and you have to say this, because if you don't, Meiser Sheni, Mamish, what do you mean? How could it be that Meiser Sheni, meaning we're saying in that same brisa that Shvius and Meiser Sheni you could transfer onto animals. But by Meiser Sheni it says, V'tzarta kesef biyodecha. It says that you have to take money biyodcha in your hand. So you have to transfer the kedusha, the Meiser Sheni, the fruits of Meiser Sheni onto money, not onto animals. So ela dmei Meiser, hachanami dmei shvius. No, rather it's talking about the money of Meiser, right? If you take your produce and of Meiser Sheni, you transfer it onto money, and then that money you're transferring onto animals. So here also, we're talking about the money of shvius, that you're transferring onto animals, but first level of Kedusha Shvius, i.e. the fruits themselves, the only way to for Kedusha Shvius to go on to something else would be through a transaction. Zok the Mishnah. Barishona aya lulav nita b'mikdash shiva u'v'amdina yom echad. Givaldi. So initially, the lulav was taken in the Beis HaMikdash for 7 days. Okay. Medina, Rashi says Medina is Yerushalayim, outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And outside of the Beis HaMikdash, the lulav would be taken for 1 day. Okay? Because as we learned the other day, or really a bunch of times, there's a mitzvah to shake the lulav on the first day of Sukkah. So outside of the Beis HaMikdash, they would do that. The first day of Sukkot, they would take the lulav. In the Beis HaMikdash, right, it says, you'll be happy before God for 7 days. So in the Beis HaMikdash, they would take the lulav all 7 days. So it says in the Mishnah Barishona, initially, lulav nita b'mikdash shiva. The lulav would be taken in the Beis HaMikdash for 7 days. V'amdina yom echad. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, 1 day. But after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Givaldig. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made the following takana: She'eh lulav nita b'mdina shiva zeicher lemikdash. That we should take the dalad minim outside of the Beis HaMikdash all 7 days as a remembrance, as a reminder to what they would do in the Beis HaMikdash. That they would take it all 7 days. So now we take the lulav all 7 days. V'shei yom ha'neif kulo aser. What's the yom ha'neif? Who could tell me? It's the 16th day of Nisan, right? The second day of Pesach, when they would offer the korban ha'omer. So once already the omer offering was offered, so then you were allowed to eat chadash. You were allowed to eat the new produce of that year. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana. He established that after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, that entire day, the 16th day of Nisan, you can't yet eat the chadash until the next day, right? Even though, technically speaking, we'll see in the Gemara, maybe you could have already started eating the chadash from the beginning of the day. Says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that entire day on the 16th of Nisan, do not eat the new grain. Wait till the next day. Says the Gemara, Minalon davdinan zeichel hamikdash. In fact, the Gemara, how do we know that there's this concept of doing things in order to remember the Beis HaMikdash? Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Cross, as Rabbi Yochanan, the pasuk says, Ki ale aruch alach. I will make a medicine for you, and I will heal you from your wounds. Ne'um Hashem, the word of God. Ki nidacha karulach, that they called you, pushed off. Tzion nidorish einla. Zion doesn't have somebody to search for it. Dorish einla michal debaya drisha. So we see that Zion doesn't have somebody sort of expounding it, searching for it. Therefore, we need to search after it and do things that remind us of Tzion and Yerushalayim. So we have to make takonis. Zeicher lemikdash. Givaldik. V'sheyeh yom ha'neif. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takone that on the 16th day of Nisan, which was the day that they would offer the Omer offering, which would then allow you to eat the grain of the new year from that point on, until the Omer offering was offered on the 16th day of Nisan, which is the second day of Pesach, you were not yet allowed to eat grain that was harvested in the current year. Once the Omer offering was offered on the second day of Pesach, you could now eat the new grain from that year. Now, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, you the entire 16th day, you could not eat from the new grain, from the new crop. You would have to wait till the next day. My time, how come Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says this? So now, the reason being that, technically speaking, the pasuk says, Ad etzem hayom hazeh. right? What does it say? It says, do we say, Araviachem, okay, Ad etzem yom hazeh, yeah, Ad etzem, does it say the pasuk? I don't know. But it says in the context of, what is it? Shabbos. I don't know. Ad etzem yom, I'm not sure. But it says in the context of the Omer offering, Ad etzem yom hazeh, till basically this day. So the assumption is that Ad etzem yom hazeh means till the morning, till dawn of the 16th day of Nisan, meaning that when the Beis Hamikdash is around, so you wait until they bring the Omer offering. Once the Omer offering is offered, so you can now eat the Chodesh, you can now eat the grain of the new year. But if there's no Beis Hamikdash and we're not bringing an Omer offering, so then Ad etzem hayom hazeh, so then already from dawn of the 16th day of Nisan, you could already eat the Chodesh, the new grain that was harvested this year. So now, the question is, how come Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying differently? How come he's saying, no, don't eat the grain, the new grain for the entire 16th day of Nisan, wait until the 17th day? How come? If technically speaking, we're saying if there's no Beis Hamikdash and there's no Korban Omer, you could already eat it from the beginning of the 16th of the day. So my time, so effectively Gemara, how come Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai felt that you have to wait until the 17th and you couldn't just stick to the halacha, which is that from the morning of the 16th? Meher Yibane Beis HaMikdash, well, because the Beis HaMikdash will be speedily rebuilt, and as Rashi points out, in the second to bottom line of Rashi, about Mikdash HaOsid, that the future Beis HaMikdash anu mitzapin, that we are hoping for it, that we are pining for it, Banuyu Mishuchlalu, it's already built, Namaise. Yigale v'yavo mishamayim, and it will just push it, come down from the heavens. Shenemar, as the Pasuk says, Mikdash Hashem konenu yadecha, that the temple of God is already sort of built and prepared. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, look, the Beis HaMikdash can just kind of come down immediately. V'yomu yishtakin miloachanu beheir mizrach, hashtana minecho. And then what will happen when the Beis HaMikdash is built? So let's say, well, last year we were able to eat the Omer already from the beginning of the 16th of the day. So, what? From the beginning of the 16th of the day? That doesn't make sense, right? From the beginning of the 16th day, maybe? Right, so when the Beis HaMikdash is built, so everyone's going to remember, oh yeah, right, for years and years, we would always, on the 16th of Nisan, at the beginning of the day, from dawn, we would already be able to eat the new grain. So now that there's a Beis HaMikdash, you're not going to change your ways, and you can continue to eat the new grain from the morning of the 16th. But that's not true anymore. Now that there's a Beis HaMikdash, you have to wait until the Omer offering is offered. And it's going to create a mess, because people are going to start eating the new grain from the beginning of the day, since that's what they were doing before the Beis HaMikdash was around. They're not going to realize the ishtakedu lahava Beis HaMikdash she'er mizrach hitir. And they're not going to realize that, yeah, the reason why you used to be able to eat the new grain from the beginning of the 16th day is because when there's no Beis HaMikdash, so you were allowed to eat from dawn. But hashadika Beis HaMikdash, now that there's a Beis HaMikdash, Omer matir. The Korban Omer is what's going to allow you to eat the new grain. Meaning once the Korban Omer is offered, you can now eat the new grain. But before then, you cannot. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says that it's going to create a mess. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was concerned that when the Beis HaMikdash comes back, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, of course, lived during the time of the Beis HaMikdash. He was at the very end. So he says, look, the Beis HaMikdash is going to come back. And when that happens, I don't want to have any messes with people remembering that they used to eat the new grain from the beginning of the 16th of the 16th day. So therefore, it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, to avoid that, just don't eat. So now that there's no Beis HaMikdash, do not eat the Chodesh for the entire 16th, and that way there won't be any issues. Divne Emas. Now the Gemara wants to say, still, I still don't understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's Gezerah. Because at what time, when is the Beis HaMikdash, when is the third Beis HaMikdash going to be rebuilt that we're concerned about this? If we're saying that the Beis HaMikdash is going to zoom down from heaven on the 16th day of Nisan, Well, that means that in the morning of the 16th day of Nisan, the Beis Hamikdash had not yet descended, which means that comes the beginning of the 16th day of Nisan, the Beis Hamikdash was still not built. So you could already eat the Chadash from that morning. So what's the problem? Okay, so maybe then the Beis Hamikdash came down the previous day, on the 15th day of Nisan. But if that's the case, then, and therefore we're concerned that now the next day, on the 16th day of Nisan, now that there's a Beis Hamikdash, you have to wait until the Omer is offered, and you're going to keep on, right, the thing that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is concerned about, that, well, every other year, you are already eating the Chadash from the beginning of the day, so now you're going to also eat Chadash from the beginning of the day, but now there's a Beis Hamikdash, and it's going to become a mess, but still, Michatzus hayom u'leholan tishtri. But still, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's gezerah should only be from noon and onwards. That people who are far away from the Beis Hamikdash and they don't know what time the Omer was actually offered, meaning when the Beis Hamikdash exists, and you can only eat the Chadash once the Omer has been offered. What if you live far away from the Beis Hamikdash and you don't know yet if the Omer has been offered yet? Well, you can assume that after noon, the Omer has already been offered. Because Bezdin is not lazy. Right? They make sure to get things done. And therefore, by noon already you can assume that that the Omer has been offered. So therefore, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is making this gezerah, that for future generations, we don't want you eating the Omer from the beginning of the 16th of the day. That doesn't make sense, I know, but I keep on saying it, so we're going to go with it. Right? So therefore, right, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, look, we don't want you eating the Chadash from the beginning of the 16th of the day, because what happens when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, and you're going to still be eating the Omer from the beginning of the 16th of the day, and that's going to be a problem, because now that there's a Beis Hamikdash, you have to wait until after the Korban HaOmer is offered. I think I just said eating the Omer, I mean eating the Chadash. But now, why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai have to say that you can't eat the Chadash for the entire 16th day? What he should say is that even now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, you still can only begin eating the Chadash after noon. Because anyways, you could assume even when there is a Beis Hamikdash that by noon, the Omer has already been offered. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, why don't you just say that now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, on the 16th day of Nisan, you can only start eating the Chadash from noon and onwards. And that way, when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, worst comes to worst, you'll just start eating Chadash from noon onwards and it won't be any problem. So, and for the Gemara, lo tzricha, the ivnei b'leilya. Well, what if the third Beis Hamikdash comes down at night, right? The 15th at night, the night between the 15th and the 16th. Or maybe on the 15th, but very close to Shkia, i.e., at a time when there won't really be so much time to prepare, right? It takes a lot of time to prepare the Korban Omer. And if the Beis Hamikdash comes down at night, it'll take a long time and they'll only be able to get to offering the Korban Omer, later in the day on the 16th. So out of concern that, well, maybe when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, it might be rebuilt overnight or very close to Shkia, there won't be so much time to prepare the Omer, and that year, the Omer will have to be brought later on the 16th, and because there's a Beis Hamikdash, you can't eat the Chadash until after the Omer is offered, and that day the Omer might be offered later on in the day. So to prevent even a situation like that, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, look, for all generations, do not eat from the new grain the entire 16th of the day, and that way there won't be there's no chance of blunders when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. All right, sounds very nice to me. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, so he actually gives a different pshat, which is a very interesting pshat, which is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shittis Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, as Rashi points out, Rabbi Yehuda of course, was much later than Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had students, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, who were teachers of Rabbi Akiva, who was the teacher of Rabbi Yehuda. So, of course, Rabbi Yehuda was later. So, Rashi points out that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Kilu, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is in line with that which we see from the later Rabbi Rabbi Yehuda, who says, "Damar min haTorah hu aser." You hear that? Tichsiv ad etzem hayom hazeh ad itzumo shayom v'kasavar ad va'ad b'chlal. So Rabbi Yehuda actually says that, we had wanted to say that when there's no Beis Hamikdash, already from Alos HaShachar, already from the beginning, from dawn on the 16th day of Nisan, you could eat the Chadash Mida Oraisa, when there's no Beis Hamikdash, from the beginning of the day. But says Rabbi Yehuda, actually, when there's no Beis Hamikdash, the entire 16th day, you cannot eat the Chadash, you cannot eat the new produce, the new grain. And that's because the Pasuk says, Ad etzem hayom hazeh, ad itzumo shel yom, that the entire day, we're talking about the entire 16th day, because over ad va'ad b'chlal, and he holds that, as we know from Masechta Brachos, ad va'ad b'chlal, that when it says until, it means until and including. So what it's saying is that you're not allowed to eat from the new grain the entire 16th day. And therefore, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that you're not allowed to eat the new grain on the entire 16th day of Nisan, now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, it's actually because he holds that Mida Oraisa, you're not allowed to eat on the 16th day of Nisan, you're not allowed to eat the Chadash that entire day. But does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai really hold like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, which is that the entire 16th day, Mida Oraisa, you're not allowed to eat the Chadash? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Taka argues on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Tanan, Mishachar Beis Hamikdash, as our Mishnah says, that once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, his skin, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana, sheyayom hanev kulo aser, that the entire day of the Omer should be aser. Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'alo min haTorah aser." Isn't it aser mida oraisa? Tichsev ad etzem hayom hazeh ad itzumo shel yom. That because the pasuk says that etzem hayom hazeh, until sort of the entire day, and we say ad va'ad b'chlal, so you can't eat it the entire day. So we see that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying that there was a takana that we established that on the 16th day you should not be eating from the chadash, from the new grain. And Rabbi Yehuda seems to be arguing and saying, what do you mean? It's not a gezerah, it's not a takana derabanan, it's mida oraisa, you're not allowed to eat the entire 16th day. So how could it be that we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Yehuda agree if it seems that Rabbi Yehuda is questioning Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's opinion? So the Gemara answers Rabbi Yehuda, who the katai, who sav midirabanan kamer, v'lo midoraisa kamer. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who's mistaken. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, I don't understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What does it mean that he made a takana derabanan? Mida oraisa, you're not allowed to eat the entire 16th day. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yehuda was making a mistake. He thought that what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying was mida rabanan, but really Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds that mida oraisa, you're not allowed to eat the chadash the entire 16th day. V'ahiskin ka'amar. But fact the Gemara, yeah, but how can you say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is talking about mida oraisa? It says hiskin. He made a takana derabanan that you're not allowed to eat the chadash the entire 16th day. That sounds like derabanan, not the oraisa. My hiskin darish v'hiskin. No, what it means is, what does it mean that he made a takana? It means that he expounded the pasuk that when it says that etzem hayom hazeh, it means ad itzumo shel yom and ad va'ad b'chlal, meaning he learned out, he expounded the psukim, and then said, you see, so the halacha is that you're not allowed to eat the chodesh the entire 16th day, i.e., he basically says that mida oraisa, you're not allowed to eat chodesh the entire 16th day. So according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan is actually saying that mida oraisa, you're not allowed to eat the chodesh the entire 16th day of Nisan. Okay, now we get to a new Mishnah. Yom Tov Harishon Shechalios b'Shabbos. Okay, if the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, and they wanted to take the lulav. So nowadays we don't take the lulav on Shabbos. But okay, they're saying that they would take the lulav on Shabbos. What they would do is Yom Tov Rishon Shechalios b'Shabbos Kol Amolichin Es Luvein Leveis HaKnesses. And we're going to see tomorrow, I think, why we don't take the lulav on Shabbos. But for now, we're saying over here that they would. And it says Shechalios b'Shabbos Kol Amolichin Es Luvein Leveis HaKnesses. So everybody before Shabbos, they would bring their lulav to the synagogue. L'machras, and then the next day, mashkim uvoid, they would then come to shul the next day. Wow, they went to shul. And everybody recognized their lulav. V'notlo, and they would take their lulav. Because on the first day of Sukkot, you can't use your friend's lulav. You have to use your own lulav. So therefore, everybody would bring their lulav to the synagogue the day before, before Shabbos. But everybody would recognize their own lulav because you have to use your own lulav. And when it comes to the rest of the days of Sukkot, Adam Yotzei Yidei Chavasu B'Lulav Shel Chaveru. A person can use their friend's lulav the rest of Sukkot, but on the first day you got to use your own. Rabbi Yossi Omer says, Rabbi Yossi, Yom Tov Harishon Shechalios b'Shabbos, if the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, v'shachach v'otzi as lulav l'reshus harabim, oy v'avoy, and a fellow makes a mistake and he brings his lulav into the public domain, which of course is a problem, hotzam reshus l'reshus, which we know all about, potter. Says Rabbi Yossi, he's potter in this case, because he took it out with permission, meaning because since he was tarud b'mitzvah, as Rashi points out, right? Since he was sort of in the context of the mitzvah, and, because he was all worked up about the mitzvah, that's what led him to make the mistake and go out to Rishus Harabim, which is, of course, an Issur D'Oraisa, Otzam Rishus L'Rishus. But because it was tiered to the mitzvah, he's potter from a korban, says Rabbi Yossi. In fact, the Gemara Minani Mile. How do we know that on the first day of Sukkot you have to take your own lulav? You can't borrow one. The Tana Rabbanan, as the rabbis taught, L'kachtem, and you'll take, that everybody's got to take their own lulav. Lachem, yours, mishalachem. It's got to be your lulav. Lotzias hashal v'sagazul, to the exclusion of a borrowed or stolen lulav. Mikan amu chachamim. From here, the rabbi said, that a fellow is unable to use his friend's daled minim on the first day of Sukkot. Ela imkain. Nas nolav matana, unless of course his friend gives it to him as a gift. So if Reuven wants to borrow Shimon's daled minim on the first day of Sukkot, Shimon would have to give it to Lulav to Reuven as a gift. Right? He says Ulkachtem lochem by Yom HaRishon. On the Yom HaRishon, on the first day of Sukkot, it has to be lochem, it has to be yours. Umaise, there was an incident from Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, with Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Shayu Boin Basvina, that they were coming on a boat. And the only one with the daled minim was Rabbi Gamliel. And he had purchased his daled minim for 1,000 zuz. Rabbi Gamliel took his lulav and he was yotzei the mitzvah of lulav. And then he gave it to Rabbi Yoshua as a gift. Now Rabbi Yoshua, who received it as a gift, he then was yotzei the mitzvah of lulav. And then he gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah b'matana as a gift. And then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took this daled minim and he was yotzei the mitzvah, and then he gave it as a gift to Rabbi Akiva. And then Rabbi Akiva took the daled minim, he was yotzei the mitzvah, and then he gave it back to Rabbi Gamliel. I wonder if this was the same sukkahs where Rabbi Gamliel said you don't have to build a sukkah on the boat, and Rabbi Akiva says that you do. Yistam it was. I don't know how many sukkahs were they on a boat. And then where was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Yoshua in that situation? But anyways. How come it's important to say that Rabbi Akiva returned the daled minim to Rabbi Gamliel? Because it's teaching us a side note, which is Matana amanas la'achzir shma matana, that if you give a gift under the condition that it be returned to you, that's still considered a good gift giving. Ki hada amar Rave, like that which Rave says, Heiloch esrig zeh, if a fellow, Reuben says to Shimon, he says, take this esrig, al menashech shetachziruli, I'll give you my esrig under the condition that you give it back to me. Nitalo v'yotzebo. So if, so Reuben gave his esrig to Shimon, so if Shimon now uses the esrig, hechziro yotza, lechziro lo yotza. So if Shimon returns the esrig back to Reuven, so then he's yotze the mitzvah of dal minim. If he doesn't return the esrig to Reuven, so then he's not yotze. Because we're saying that a matana amanas la'achzir, giving a gift under the condition that it's returned, is okay. It's considered a good gift. And therefore, Reuven's allowed to say, hey Shimon, you can have this esrig, but you have to give it back to me. In which case, if Shimon doesn't give it back, so then it wasn't a good, he's just stealing it. And if he's stealing it, so then you can't use a stolen esrig. But you could, if Reuven gives it to Shimon on just condition that he returns it, then it's considered his as long as he returns it. How come it's important to know how much money Rabbi Gamliel spent on his esrig? To let you know how beloved mitzvahs were to them, that they were even willing to spend 1,000 zuz on an esrig. My bar Mimah says to Ravashi, my father would do everything with his daled minim, everything with his lulav. No, what? No, that's not what it says. It says that he would daven with his lulav. That the entire davening, the entire Shmona Esrei, he would be holding his daled minim. But we have a kasha. A person should not be holding his tefillin in his hands or a sefer Torah. V'yispalel and daven. A person shouldn't urinate when he's wearing his tefillin, and he shouldn't sleep in his tefillin, not any kind of sleep, not permanent, not temporary. Shmuel says, sakin v'kaire, that if you're a fellow who's holding a knife or a plate with something on it, kikar umos, bread or money, these are like those, meaning you shouldn't daven if you're holding like a knife or something. So if you shouldn't daven when you're holding these things, so then you shouldn't daven when you're holding a lulav. So and for the Gemara, hasam la mitzvah v'tarid bu, hacha mitzvah v'lo tarid bu. Over there by the knife and those things, you're not doing any mitzvah, and all you're doing is like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't drop this knife. When it comes to the lulav, you're excited about the lulav. It's a mitzvah, and it's sort of, it's not like, you're concerned, oh no, what's going to happen? Like, you're kind of focused on the mitzvah, and it's going to enhance your davening, not take away from it. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok Omer says, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, this was the minig of the people in Jerusalem. A fellow would leave his house, he would have his lulav with him. He would go to the synagogue and he would have his lulav with him. He would read Kriyas Shema, he would daven, Shmona Esrei, he would be holding his lulav. When he goes to read from the Torah or to do Birkas Kohanim, he would leave it on the ground. If he would go to visit the sick, and to comfort the mourning, he would go with his lulav. Interesting, because I thought that we don't do avelus on the Shalosh Regalim, but anyways. Nichnas leveis hamedrash, and when he goes to the Beis Hamedrash, mishager lulavo biyad beno v'yad avdo v'yad shlucha, he would give his lulav to his son, to his servant, to his messenger. Ma'ikamash malon. What is the point here? Ladecha kama ayuz reason b'mitzvahs, to show you how fastidious they were about doing the mitzvahs. That everywhere they went, basically, they would take their lulav with them. That is the Anshe Yerushalayim. Okay. Alright, that was daf Mem Aleph of Masechta Sukkah. Let's do a shtickle review. So the first part of the daf, we continued with machlokas between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan about how can the holiness of Shemitah be transferred onto other things. So Rabbi Eliezer says only by way of a transaction, only by a purchase, by a sale. And Rabbi Yochanan says additionally, you could just transfer the money the holiness onto like money or something else, like you can with any other, Meiser Sheni or something like that. Now then we saw that, says Rav Ashi, that this machlokas is only by pre-Sheni, right? So for example, if you take fruits of Shvius and then use it to buy meat, we talked about, for example, so then that second level, that second degree of Kedusha Shvius, if you want to transfer it to something else, you have right to the machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer says the only way to transfer it would be through another sale. Rabbi Yochanan says that no, you can even transfer it just like you would transfer Meiser Sheni, like onto money or something. You don't need a sale. However, when it comes to pre-Rishon, when it comes to the fruit itself, so then everyone agrees that you can only transfer it, only something else can only take on the holiness of it through a sale, not through just being mechal, not through just transferring its kedusha onto something else. We then got to a new Mishnah where we said that in the Beis Hamikdash we would take the lulav in the Beis Hamikdash all 7 days, and outside of the Beis Hamikdash only on the first day. After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says everywhere we should do it 7 days. Take the Dalaminim for 7 days, Zeicher LeMikdash, to remember the Beis Hamikdash. And also that on the Yom HaNeif, that on the 16th day of Nisan, when they would offer the Korban HaOmer, that so when the Beis Hamikdash was around, so once the Omer was offered, you could eat the Chodesh, you could eat the new produce of that year. Technically speaking, after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, you could already eat the Omer, the Chodesh, from the beginning of the 16th of the day. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said no, the entire 16th day you should not be eating Chodesh. The Gemara says, how come Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made such a takana? So first the Gemara says, well, because we're concerned, what if the Beis Hamikdash comes down from the heavens at night, right before the 16th, and they won't have time to get everything in order, and they'll only be able to offer the Korban Omer late in the day on the 16th. And you might say, well, every other year you were eating already from the beginning of the 16th of the day. So then that you'll be eating, I keep on saying Omer, I think, but the Chodesh from the beginning of the 16th of the day. But the fact of the matter is, you can only, that year, you'll only be able to eat the Chodesh from the end of the day, because they only brought the Omer at the end of the day, whatever, a whole mess. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that from now on, until the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, on the 16th day of Nisan, you cannot eat Chodesh, wait till the 17th day. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, actually, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds that Mida Oraisa. It says, Ad etzem yom hazeh, ad yitzumosh yom hazeh, ad va'ad bichlal. So actually, Mida Oraisa, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's opinion is that that when there's no Beis Hamikdash, you cannot eat Chodesh for the entire 16th day. You have to wait till the 17th day. The takana is just that he darshed in the pasuk and then made a takana based on a Joshua Midoraisa. Fine. We then get up to a new Mishnah which says that on the first day of Sukkot, you basically need to have your own lulav. It's because it says L'kachtem lechem b'yom harishin. It has to be yours on the first day. But we did say, interestingly, that you are allowed to give it as a gift to somebody, then it's theirs and they can use it, and you can even give it as a gift under the condition that they return it to you. That's the right. Matana amnas lachzir shma matana is considered a good gift, and that's acceptable, as we saw in a story with Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yeshua. Those are really the main sugyas today. And Daf Mem Aleph was a pretty stark daf, a lot dartin. Chev, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy your day. Peace.